water plant project. We're going to give you an update tonight on that project. We have the project engineer who's with us here tonight from CDM Smith. Has done all of our communication, all of our interaction with the contractors and project oversight. So we also have Jason Upton here. He's our utility superintendent who oversees our water and wastewater. And so I'm going to let them give this update. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask after we're done here. So excellent. With that, we have Amrua Tassi here.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to give an update on this project. CDM Smith has been involved with the filtration facility going back several years ago when we did the study, and then the study went into pilot testing, design, and now we are in the final stage of construction. So I'm going to give you an update on where we are financially, schedule-wise as well, and then obviously be happy to take any questions from the council and the mayor. So I'll give a quick overview of the project, give you kind of a construction update. We do have some photos of what's taking place with the project. Again, a financial update in terms of the numbers, a schedule update, and then obviously be happy to take any questions. So just to give everyone an overview, this all started in January of 2013 through an RFQ process. CDM Smith was selected to do a study to evaluate options to renovate the existing filtration facility. I don't know if any of the council members have had a chance to see the filtration facility. It's over 100 years old. It's well past its useful life. We evaluated both upgrading that facility as well as building a brand new facility. And based on a cost analysis as well as non-cost factors, it was deemed more financially feasible for the city of Rock Island to build a brand new filtration facility while keep the existing one in operation. So we did pilot testing, we evaluated different media configurations, and ultimately selected sand and anthracite conventional filtration to treat this water. But we also put in an alternate bid item to put in ultraviolet disinfection to provide the city of Rock Island additional protection for the inactivation of Giardia and Cryptosporidium. That was an optional thing. The city is well in compliance with all regulatory requirements, but the city wanted that additional protection. So we put in, on each filter, there is an ultraviolet light disinfection reactor to provide that additional treatment. That filtration facility, although it's rated for 12 million gallons per day, it does have the vision that in the future, should you need to treat more water, that filtration facility does allow you to produce up to 50 million gallons per day of water. All new SCADA controls to provide the city and the staff the ability to monitor water quality as well as provide the reporting requirement for the Illinois EPA. Within that facility, there's new maintenance and admin areas for the staff. And again, everything started in January of 2013. At the bottom here, you see some of the photos of the old filtration facility that staff have done a marvelous job keeping that facility in operation. Jason and his team, it's quite a great job they've done to keep that facility in operation. A lot of the things that are in there, not only well past their useful life, a lot of the parts are no longer available, and they're doing everything they can up to this moment to keep that facility running. We only got, hopefully, one more month, and we'll be ready to switch to the new filtration facility. Just to introduce the team that's been working together since 2013, obviously, city staff, the engineering department, the building department, throughout the design. Multiple folks from the building department were involved in making sure that the design met the current building requirements. The design is being led by CDM Smith. I'm the project manager. I was involved, again, going back to 2013, was the project manager for the study, the design, and now through construction. Shive Hattery was our sub to provide architectural design as well as on-site inspection. Civil Incorporated is the contractor, a local contractor. They've done a lot of work within the city. And these are some of their subs, Tri-City for electrical, Miller Excavation for some of the site work. Want to also mention one important partner on this project is the Illinois EPA, because this project is funded through an Illinois EPA SRF loan that made this project possible. Just going to share some photos. Right here is our new filtration facility on the outside. If you're looking from 16th Avenue, this is probably a little outdated photo of the inside of the filtration area. It's much more cleaner now if you were to take a walk, where you can see our 8 filter bays. This is our pipe gallery, 1 floor below the filters. A lot of the piping and the valves that operate that filtration facility, as well as our UV disinfection reactor. This is a photo of, on each 2 filters, they share one of these filter consoles that essentially operate the filter in a remote mode, in addition to being SCADA operated from a control room. This is our pumping area. We have both backwash pumps to backwash the filters, as well as filtrate pumps to push the water out of the filters into our domes. This is one of the filters, what it looks like while it's being air scoured is one of the backwash mechanisms. These are the troughs, and inside these filters, you've got 18 inches of sand, 12 inches of sand and 18 inches of anthracite. Some more photos. You might recognize this is the water tower that's used for backwashing. Again, this is photos of the exterior of the building. This is one of those UV disinfection reactors. There's 3 lamps inside each one of these reactors that's going to provide additional protection beyond what the filtration facility can do. So let's get on with the kind of the cost and the schedule updates. So when CDM Smith and the city were working on the design, at each design milestone, we prepared a cost estimate and a budget for the city. And of the last cost estimate that we prepared for the project, we said that with all the contingencies and the potential change orders, the project would have a budget of about $25 million. That was the last opinion of probable construction costs. When we opened bids in 2017, we received excellent bids from all the contractors, and the low bid, civil, was at about $18.5 million, well below the budget, which is great news. Anytime you have a project coming over under budget based on the bids, it's great news. So wanted just to point out what was assumed going into the budget when the bids came in. What we've paid that contractor to date is about $15.3 million. But we did have a few change orders that I want to talk about today. Where we are today with the approved change orders is about $19.2 million. We do have some additional potential change orders that's going to put us about just under $19.3 million, and this is where we stand today. We're probably about 86% complete on the project. So hopefully, we've already uncovered all the major unknowns on the project. 3 major issues that have impacted these change orders. The first one is unforeseen underground conditions. I'm going to share a little exhibit on that in a little bit. The second one, originally in the project during design, we did include SCADA servers as part of the project. The old servers that were used in the old filtration facility were starting to get past their useful life. They had limited capacity. But when the project came, budget of $25 million, we really didn't feel that there's a lot of room to throw more things. So the servers were left out of the project. But after the bids came in well below the $25 million, we went back and asked for the servers to be back in there because there's room in the overall project budget. But that obviously had to be a change order to go back and add those servers. And last is some of the winter delays, the extreme harsh winter that we experienced in 2018. There's a little bit of small change for that. But I would say the two major causes are the unforeseen underground and the SCADA. Again, just a reminder, this is Illinois EPA funded. The interest rate, I believe, is under 2%. And it does allow for up to 3% change orders. And in a discussion with the IEPA, most likely they'll fund anything above 3%. So some of the challenges that we've run into that are caused some of the change orders, this is an exhibit of one of the site plans. A lot of things are going on this site where the new filtration facility is taking place. You have a 100-year-old structure, a lot of underground piping, and even though we did a survey of the entire site, it's hard, unless you excavated the entire site and looked what's in here, Once the contractors started working, a lot of pipes had to be relocated during construction. So that obviously contributed to one change order. The other one, there was a buried sludge thickener basin that was not known to anyone, and basically the contractor, once they excavated and found that, that had to be removed, and that was an additional change order to the contractor. And then the other one is the SCADA improvements and the servers that I mentioned. That is by far the largest change order on the project. And again, it was originally in the project budget, but it was removed because we didn't think there were enough funds for it. To give you a little bit of schedule update, in the original project schedule, we had a notice to proceed on July 24 of 2017, which by contract was substantial completion. We refer to the term substantial completion. That's when they have to produce water. There's still work to be done on site, but that's when we're able to treat water out of this filtration facility while complying with all state and federal regulatory requirements in terms of drinking water. And then final completion, basically any site prep work, plus the demo of the old filtration facility, that date was July 24 of 2019. Obviously, we well passed those two dates. Because of the unforeseen underground conditions as well as the winter delays, we've given this contractor additional time. We're looking at November 1st of 2019, which is coming up in less than a month, to produce water out of this new filtration facility. And our final completion, we gave them till July 15th of 2020. This is to allow for the spring to do all the site cleanup work, landscaping, and the demo of the old filtration facility. We just had another meeting today, and I must say we have a lot to do over the next 2 weeks, but I'm confident that we'll get through it. There are going to be a few tough days early November when we're producing water out of the new filtration facility, but we're not quite at our full capacity. We may be looking at blending water from the old filtration facility with the new filtration facility. We maybe not have the ability to have all 8 filters online. It's not going to be easy, but we'll get through it. This is what happens when you transition from an old filtration facility to a new filtration facility. But our goal is to have this new filtration facility online before the winter. And obviously, we still need the IEPA to sign off on the operating permit to make sure that we've met all of our federal and state requirements in terms of that drinking water. So I know I went through a lot of information very quickly. So just one last slide just to give you kind of what's ahead. November, we're focusing on disinfection and producing water. In December, we're focusing on the UV reactors, getting all the startup and the testing. And then in early 2020 through the summer of 2020, site cleanup, admin facility finishes, continue with SCADA and the training, and of course, demo of the old filtration facility. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
If you could go back to slide number 12 for a second, that one with the schematic there. When you say unable to isolate existing 12 and 16-inch water mains, what do you mean by isolate?
So in some cases, when we have to relocate a water main because it's exactly where the new filtration facility is going to go, when you go into that water main and trying to relocate it, you go to close that valve and to isolate a segment, and water is still coming out. That means it's connected in more locations than what was shown on the record drawings. So essentially, the contractor has to go back until they are able to isolate that line because it's connected to something that's not shown on the drawing.
Oh, isolate it from the rest of the system?
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question is, can you tell me what SCADA means?
SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's the brain behind operating the water plant. So when we look at new servers, all the data that's collected, we have hundreds of I/O and data that's being collected. We have turbidimeters that measure the water quality, the cloudness of the water. We have flow meters. We have level sensors, pressure, all hundreds of data points that are being collected daily, if not more. That has to go into a computer to store all this data and be able to do analytics on the data and submit that on a routine basis to the IEPA. So that's why we needed those new SCADA servers to be able to handle the additional data that's coming in. But essentially, SCADA is what operates the whole water plant.
Thank you. And for people who might be interested, years ago when I grew up in that neighborhood, the sedimentation tanks used to be outdoors on the west side of the property, open air. They were fenced in, but you could easily throw things in the tanks if you wanted to do that as a young boy.
Not that you did.
No.
Will customers or residents experience anything while transferring over from the old facility to the new? Are we going to have to be telling people, hey, you might experience something with the water that they're consuming?
I do not believe so. The water is we're not changing any disinfectants or chemicals. We're not changing the direction of flow. From a taste and odor, I would imagine it's gonna be the same. I will tell you, and you don't need me to tell you this, if you've been to the old filtration facility, we should be able to produce much better water quality than what we're currently producing. The filter media, it's a much deeper media. And plus, we have ultraviolet light disinfection. You won't notice that from a taste and odor. But should the river throw us any cryptosporidium, if you remember in 1994, that's what happened in Milwaukee. There was cryptosporidium, which is a protozoa that came into the lake. And that's what the ultraviolet light disinfection basically, it prevents this from reproducing. And so you're going to see additional protection, but from a taste and odor, I don't believe you'll notice anything from a taste and odor aesthetic perspective.
Moline got the #1 best tasting water a year ago or so.
Number 3, I thought they were.
Yeah, 1, 3. So hopefully we can beat them. Friendly.
But no boil orders, no sputtering in the faucets or anything like that? I mean, is that to be expected?
I don't believe so. I think during the transition, I don't want to say never. I mean,
Sure.
we're working on a plan. And the plan, when we demo or when we abandon the old filtration facility and we're relying on the new filtration facility, we got to make sure all of our filters are ready to go. There's always a potential for hiccup during the transition, but at this point right now, I don't believe that we have anything that would necessitate a boil water order or anything that would require notifying the customers.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Look forward to
Thank
a
you very
tour.
much. Thank you.
I'll send an invite to the elected officials too. ILO is doing a toolbox lunch in 2 weeks. I don't remember the date exactly, but I'll send it out to you. It's where they bring in pizza for all the contractors and invite the elected officials to that. So you'll get an invitation. Then at some point, we'll set up a tour of the plant when it gets to the point where it's done or close to being done.
All right. So next we have the business loan program.
Okay, good evening. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what I have found out in regard to one of the council goals that was set for this year. So I have been investigating what other communities do in regard to small business loans. Some are zero interest, like I was asked to take a look at, and some are lower interest, similar to what our CURLIF program has done in the past and will continue to do in the future. So we currently offer business assistance programs that are comparable to what other communities in the Quad Cities and in our regional area offer to their residents and their business community. But we have been asked to take a look at that, so we started with Google, of course, to see what people have out there, and then we took a look at the immediate Quad Cities area more closely. Muscatine, Iowa, offers a zero-interest forgivable loan program, and they use that specifically to incentivize infill on vacant lots or redevelopment in targeted areas within their community. So it must be a new or expanding business, so they want a new product line or a new service, expanded product line or expanded service. They lend up to $25,000 for 5 years with 20% forgiven on the anniversary of the loan each year. And there is a certification process in that same month that the loan originates every year to make sure that they're meeting the standards set forth by their loan program. And they have $100,000 annually allocated to that fund. So if they make the maximum loan, 4 loans a year is where they cap out on that program. Lombard, Illinois also offers a zero-interest forgivable loan. Theirs is limited to specifically downtown uses in Lombard. There are 2 TIF areas that are eligible for that, a maximum of $100,000 up to a third of the project cost. It's a 10-year loan, and 10% of that loan is forgiven each year. They make smaller loans that staff can approve administratively, but all loans over $10,000 must go before City Council for approval. They also, like with our TIF, don't do trade fixtures inventory, but they also say that equipment specific to your business is not eligible. So that's there. And they must maintain membership in the Main Street Town Center organization they have. So those are the 2 in our regional area that offer zero interest forgivable loans. There are many others that offer low interest, 2-3%, some 4%, but those are the 2 there, both for targeted uses in targeted areas. So if we want to do a zero interest forgivable loan, based on research, I propose maximum loans of $5,000 per location so that we can serve many businesses with this program. Do a 5-year forgivable loan, $1,000 or 20% forgiven each year. Current existing businesses, we know they can show us a track record of their success and kind of the scale up of their business. But a new business or a startup, we'd ask that they meet with the Small Business Development Center so that they can vet their business plan and make sure that all the necessary pieces are in place. We can limit the eligibility to specific target areas. I think that it could be a great idea to help incentivize growth in parts of town that we would like to really see that, but we can certainly do citywide depending on what council would like. We have TIF funds. A couple of our TIFs end soon, so we'd have to find other funding for those, like Downtown 2020, North 11th Street in 2023. But there is also a fund, it was SIRLIF instead of CURLIF, that was townwide, that was used for micro-lending previously, and a small balance remains in that fund. So that's available to us as well. Program objectives, I think to improve the building infrastructure, of course, should be one of our main focuses, but to assist with capital equipment purchases could be also allowable. To offset the cost of historic building preservation and address the costs associated with ADA access and making those businesses accessible to all people in our community. Also to offset fire code compliance, egress issues, and assist in meeting state and local regulations and requirements. Could be good objectives for this program. This is just a survey of information that I'm presenting to you right now. So of course, the policies and procedures will be developed pursuant to discussions we've had with Randy. A full loan program will be presented to you for consideration in January of 2020 to remain in compliance with your 2020 goal setting. And then the program could begin accepting applications as soon as council would approve that, granted that we have our funding in place. Okay, questions? Yes,
And Mr.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
First of all, very nice presentation.
thank you.
On the page that's titled Our Proposal,
Yes,
on 14th Avenue, there's like a boundary area between 30th and 38th Street. Going east from 38th Street, what made you cut that off and not go all the way to 44th?
we were talking in our office about the 2 nodes of the Hilltop District, both on 14th and 18th, and how, especially on 14th, there's a little bit of a gap, and there are some opportunities for infill there. While it's largely residential, it could potentially get some additional businesses there to not only fill in some gaps, but to support the businesses on the 30th and 38th Street sides of that corridor. So we could certainly go all the way down.
It's not based on a limitation of anything, money or anything else?
No, that was just based on conversations we had internally and trying to bring that district into a more cohesive district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When you were looking at all the different areas, did you find out what Moline has?
Moline does not have a zero-interest loan program. They do a couple things through their TIF. They have a facade program that's much like ours, and they have an additional program. If you give me just a moment here, I will tell you what the difference is. So they have their traditional areas, or traditional commercial area rejuvenation program, and that's for when the scope of work is beyond what their traditional storefront restoration does, and that's like our TIF, but they give preference to street-facing sides of the building. And this is only for projects in downtown, Old Town, Riverside, Uptown, and on the Avenue of the Cities, and only for businesses that, or excuse me, for buildings that are in pre-1970s commercial districts. So they're really interested in preserving those downtown kind of Main Street type business districts. And they will do up to $7,500, 5-year forgivable loan on that, but it's limited to a very specific set of things.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't Davenport have something also?
There is no zero interest
Okay.
or forgivable loan program listed on either Davenport Municipal site or the Downtown Davenport Partnership site. We've been playing phone tag back and forth between Kyle and I on that, so I don't have
Okay,
specific details on that for you, unfortunately.
okay, that's fine.
What, so do we have a plan on funding this program? I mean, I'm sure that's going to be part of this year's budget, right?
Well, you certainly, so if the council wants to proceed with this, then we would put something in the budget, and when we brief you on the budget here, you'll get that. But as Tara mentioned, we do have some funds in the old Surliff loan program
'Cause
that
what
we
were
could use, and there's some other places. Again, there's TIF and some other areas that we would be able to use here. So well, that would be part of the presentation. Just want to make sure at this point that you're interested in moving forward, or we won't waste any more staff time on it.
It would be a good idea.
I think it's a nice incentive. It's not a huge dollar amount, but 5,000, which is equivalent to, like what Dory pays for closing costs for a house. So very similar, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is great stuff. My only thought is let's continue to keep this in mind as we are consolidating or attempting to figure out how to work in partnership with groups like Dari instead
Yep.
of
Just another
Make a-
incentive to
Right.
bundle together with everything else
a
and put it
one-stop
together.
shop.
That's the goal.
Nice. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tara. All right, sign ordinance. Miles.
My favorite. Hello. All right. So you may remember a few months ago, gave a study session presentation all about that update to the zoning ordinance and the sign ordinance and how things with Ansel Glink had gone and kind of how we were going to move forward and sort of laid out the timeline for things. Well, I'm happy to say we are moving right along and have completed our update to the sign ordinance in what I would like to say is quick order. So very pleased with myself about that. All right, so Ansel Glink didn't have too much to say in their kind of key issues report that they put forward back in 2016. I think they devoted like one page of 36 to the sign ordinance. Mainly what they were concerned with was some of the legal justifications and lack of detail in the code. There have been some court cases in recent years that have made communities look at their sign ordinances a little bit more closely to try and tighten them up and make sure they're defensible. And they did provide, in light of that, some helpful language in their own draft documents that we have incorporated. They also had some helpful graphics. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to explain a regulation without showing a picture of it. So, for example, what is a truck sign? Okay, it's not the same as a car or a truck that actually has the business name on it. There's something different about it, and an image really is necessary for that. So we've incorporated some of those graphics.
But otherwise, they didn't have too many big structural changes, so we didn't include too much. There are a few things, though. Expansive changes were made to the introductory sections of the code, again, to address some of those legal defense concerns. So, you'll notice when you look at it eventually that it shows, findings of why a community would have said regulation, kind of assertions about our right to regulate signage in a particular way. It adds a number of pages to the document. Also, some clarifications about how we measure and calculate signs. Believe it or not, the code at present doesn't really clearly explain that. So, there's been some ambiguity about, if it's a round sign, how should we measure it? If it's like just open letters without like a back put onto a side of a building, how do we measure that? Clears that up. Also expanded and modernized definitions. There's a lot of new sign types out there that didn't exist so many years ago, so we wanted to make sure we defined them before we tried to have rules about them. We've also added some additional language about electronic signs, much more common now. We needed to explain kind of what they were, how we would approach them, so there's a whole new section on that. And very importantly, we've also clarified the difference between a temporary sign and a permanent sign. This has been the subject of a lot of internal dialogue for many years about, is a banner hung up with zip ties for multiple years an acceptable sign or not? Okay. A few more specific things that I just want to highlight. Again, kind of going to temporary signs. This new code would prohibit temporary signs that are on display continuously for more than 30 days. A temporary sign means that it's not up forever, okay? So, if you define a permanent sign loosely as something that is rigid and weatherproof and properly affixed to whatever it's on, you can think of a whole lot of signs in the community that don't meet that definition, that have been up a long time and look a little worse for the wear. There's, of course, an aesthetic concern there, but we're much more interested in issues where, let's say, a banner breaks off of its zip ties and goes into traffic and goes right onto someone's windshield and they can't see. I mean, these are the sorts of things that are really backing the code. These are how we think about it. It's public safety, really number one. Also, a prohibition of signs wrapped around poles. You may notice that there are a lot of that corrugated plastic signage stuff that gets zip tied around a light post in a parking lot or something like that. Not an acceptable sign. Also, the prohibition of window signs between 5 and 7 feet from the ground. This was something we have included at the request of our emergency first responders, specifically the police department. I want you to picture a store, let's say it's a gas station. Windows are plastered with advertisements. Police are called to the scene. They think there's some sort of robbery going on, there's some sort of emergency situation. They can't see in the building. They don't know what the situation is. They're not sure what they should do. They're going to go in blind. That's a problem. So we try to address it with this regulation. Also, on a more positive note, someone needs a wellness check. Hey, I'm worried about so-and-so. They're at this business. Can you just swing by, just pop in the window, see if they're standing there? Are they okay? So trying to include that in there. And kind of in that same vein, window films and decals need to be no less than 50% perforated, the little holes that are in the decal that you kind of stick to the glass. And you need to be able to look into the building from the exterior. The decals that are being manufactured can be made so that you only can see through the one way. You may have seen sometimes like vans for businesses. It's all windows on the van, but they have that decal on it so they can look out the window, but you can't see in. We need to make sure that we can actually look inside of businesses. And then kind of a final note about freedom of speech. We often get questions about signs that people just don't like and want to see go away. Again, we're not regulating signage because we care, about the content of the speech necessarily or how it looks, whether I think it's pretty or not. We're regulating signage based on a public health, safety, and welfare benefit, okay? There are good reasons to regulate signage the way that we do. There are signs on people's private property that are not business related, could just be in their front yard, for example, that you may not like or a citizen may not like. The sign ordinance will never touch those signs, Okay? Someone might have a University of Iowa sign that's really like an old, pallet thing stuck in their yard, and I'm not necessarily that fond of that sign, okay? Nothing I can do about that, though. That's freedom of speech. Unless it's blocking your ability to see around a corner, unless it's at risk of falling over and crushing a child, unless it poses some actual physical threat to somebody or has some sort of real dangerous component to it, we're never going to regulate those. So just wanted to make that clear because we do get a lot of complaints from citizens about signs they don't like. Well, if you don't like your neighbor's sign, put up an Iowa Cyclone sign in your front yard and you'll be good to go. So to sum it all up, the code is basically just brought up to date, reflects some changes in how signage is being done these days, addresses some issues about how the code should be justified and how we would address it if it was challenged, addresses the issues around temporary signs, tries to go some distance to help out law enforcement, and also reflects freedom of speech. Are there any questions on the sign ordinance? Yes, Mr. Spaghettis.
I've been approached by some of my constituents about some of the signs on 11th Street that are derelict, abandoned, obsolete. They're either a business that was there and that's no longer there, or in some instances, more than one, a post, a frame, or that would hold a sign and there's nothing there but open air space.
Right.
Some have even been hit by or backed into by vehicles, and so the post is bent. They're very unattractive. They don't make for a very appealing corridor to invite new business to come to. What can we do about that?
So signage which is in place, which is there for business, which has long since gone away, is already in our current code prohibited as an obsolete sign. We have limited staff time and limited ability to address every single obsolete sign that might exist in the community. So we have always sort of taken the approach of, is that sign at risk of falling over? Have we received a complaint about it? Is it very noticeable? And tried to address them kind of holistically. However, if people have specific complaints about specific signs, we'll always take a look at them. If it's a sign just frame that's empty, so there's no actual words or images, and it's just standing there in good condition, that's technically not in violation of the code. Sort of in the same manner that an empty building just sitting by itself in good condition isn't really a violation of anything. Sign posts or signage in any way damaged, where it might cause some sort of damage if it finally teeters over or something like that, might be more of a property maintenance issue, in which case just let staff know and we can try and approach it in whatever manner is most appropriate.
Thank you. I'll be in touch.
Okay, yeah, just send it on our way and we can let you know what we can do.
And there have been times when they have treated those when there were danger issues or property damage issues to potential neighbors that have come through the code enforcement through municipalities. Is the way that I remember a couple of them anyway.
And if a building's demoed, I believe the sign has to come down also. I know the old Amelia's, when they tore that down, Tom Ayers was still with us, but I talked to Jerry, and they were very insistent that the sign come down there also when they tore that down. Whether it's code or not, but they...
Yeah, it's not in the sign ordinance, but it could be elsewhere.
Yeah.
Whatever we can do to clean that visual pollution up, along with the other improvements that are coming along.
Yeah, it's always helpful if people want to just snag a photo of whatever it is they think might be a problem and just send it our way, and we can figure out if it's a actual issue the sign ordinance can address, if it's a property maintenance issue, or if it's just an old signpost. There's nothing particularly wrong with it, and not too much we can address. So we can always figure it out.
Alderman Hurt, did you have a question? Or?
I did. As this new sign ordinance, how does this relate to current businesses that may be in violation now? Are they allowed to keep, if they're in violation and they're a current business, do those businesses have to change their signage at this point?
It depends a little bit what we're talking about. So the window signage provisions specifically are identified in the code as going into effect 90 days after its adoption. So we actually are giving them a little extra time to try and comply with that. In that particular case, too, there's a public safety concern that's quite acute. So we will be working with the police chief and his team to try and get businesses to a place where they're in compliance. Other than that, a lot of the signage that would currently would upon adoption not be in compliance is that temporary signage. And we will, to the best of our ability, start to go around and have some talks with business owners. A lot of the time, it's signage that was just put up and I think no one's really thought too much about since they put it up. So it might be a simple reminder, hey, that event's been over for quite a while. You should probably take that banner down. In other cases, it might be a more of a conversation where we need to encourage people to invest a little bit in their business and upgrade the signs that they have. Obviously, we'll just start with the most egregious cases first, where we really do have some serious issues. There are a few places around town, I'm sure we can all think of, where there are perhaps an excessive number of temporary signs on a property wrapped around posts or what have you, and we will do our best to address them in time. But nobody should think that we will in some fell swoop be able to get to every single business in town, or that we're going to be breathing down their neck. We're going to be accommodating and work with people to try and get them to compliance.
Okay, thank you.
By and large, is this violation, is this just going to be handled by the code enforcement officer then? There's not, unless there's a specific complaint?
So, I mean, for signage, it'll be me and Mr. Freeze going up to businesses as we get complaints or as we become aware of situations that need to be addressed, basically having a dialogue with business owners. Our ultimate goal with all of this is to avoid going through code enforcement and municipalities. It costs everyone money, it costs time, and municipalities, as Mr. Morrison can of course back me up here, is pretty backed up. So really our goal is always to dialogue with people and help them get to a solution without having to go through code enforcement.
What about temporary, I'll say temporary signs, but yard signs, realtors, yard sales,
So
buying this house?
so anything that's like a realty sign or something that is clearly understood to be that is exempted from the code regulations. You might have a property that's for sale for many, many years, but if it's just a realty sign, that's not really causing any sort of problem. So we exempt that. Any sort of yard signs, though, say it's for a political candidate or something like that, we don't touch it. In the past, the code did include some provisions about you having to remove those sorts of signs within a certain amount of time following the election that they were referring to. Previous advice from an attorney was very strongly worded about not having that kind of regulation in place and not touching those signs at all. And I have a suspicion the city attorney wants to follow up on that.
Yeah, they're the two different, the Supreme Court structures how they prioritize the importance of speech. And so political speech is number one. And if you try to restrict it in any manner, you have to have a very tight, where they give it the strict scrutiny test is what they call it. It means that it has the highest level of scrutiny, and you better have a really, really good reason, and it better be a real small imposition on political speech. You have a little more room when you get down to commercial speech. It's still quite protected, but it's not protected as much as political or religious speech. And so I would concur with what Miles is saying.
But how about location? How about how close it is to the curb?
You're still
Public
talking about
right-of-way.
like just yard signage?
Yes.
So if it's in the public right-of-way, we can scoop that up ourselves and
Public
get it out of
right-of-way
there.
is an easement, even if it's, quote, in your yard. If it's an easement, that's public right-of-way?
Public right-of-way is well, you're talking about if the sign is in the easement?
Like the boulevard, right?
Well, that's
Boulevard,
But
right-of-way.
even the easement, at most, go ahead.
if it's in an easement, we wouldn't do anything. We don't know where most of our easements are, to be honest with you. No one would know
Yeah.
to be able to check that. We do enforce signs in the public right of way, as the Public Works Director will know. If there's an intersection that's been bothered with We Buy Houses signs, then I call him up or text him, and he has the crew pick those up. So basically, there can be nothing in the right of way without the permission of the city council. We do allow an exception. This was approved by a previous city council, and it's from noon on Thursday until 8 a.m. Monday morning, and that's for yard sale signs and open house signs for realtors. It has to be at least 5 feet behind the curb, or if there's a sidewalk, behind the sidewalk. But typically, if something's in the right of way, send me something and we'll go get it. And we got a whole pile of stuff that we pick up.
But as for setbacks on private property itself, we're not going to touch it. Again, unless it's actually doing some harm to someone, like, the sign is huge and it blocks your ability to see around a dangerous turn, we're not going to address it.
And the public, once again, I'm going to go back to temporary ones. You see some of these that are on wheels, little trailers that have signs,
Portable signs,
portable signs. I assume those are considered.
those are prohibited
Prohibited.
and have always been, actually.
Okay.
I've got a number of questions, if you can believe that or not. We've
I
had
am shocked, Mr.
lots
Parker.
of interactions regarding signs in the Fifth Ward. First and foremost, you bring up realtor signs. I guess I am concerned about exempting wholesale all realty signage, namely the billboard sides for sale signs on the side of a lot of our downtown businesses. You go on Facebook and all you hear is, I drove down 4th Avenue and the whole city's for sale, right? I've had people complain to me and say, obviously that sign has been there for 2 years and it hasn't done anything to sell the building, so why are we exempting wholesale all real estate signage?
Well, for two reasons. One, it has always been exempted, so this is not a new thing.
Sure.
The second reason is because there's a lot of counter arguments that would be made to the points you've brought up, right? Well, yes, it's been up for 2 years, but a lot of things are on the market for a long time. If you make me take my sign down or reduce it in size or change where I've put it, well, then you're reducing my ability to sell it, so it's going to be on the market even longer, right?
Yeah.
You end up in these cyclical arguments between who's trying to sell it and who's trying to regulate it that I don't think ultimately will lead to any sort of helpful conclusion. Okay. Now, if there's something wrong with the sign, if it's falling off the building and may, end up hurting someone, if it's collapsing into public right-of-way, if it's no longer legible, that might be one conversation. But really, I don't think that we would do ourselves any good by trying to place additional restrictions on for sale signs. I think the backlash to it would be quite strong.
Have you researched any other communities, what they've done?
In regards to real estate signs?
Specifically, I don't care about the yard sign, but specifically the billboard size auction or for sale signs in some of our commercial buildings.
It seems to be a pretty common practice that almost every sign ordinance that, exempts them. They're just not usually regulated.
Okay. I just know that I've received a number of complaints from my constituents.
We
about
have
them.
received similar complaints too, and we are sympathetic to them. But again, the issue with regulating signage is that you have to balance a collection of rights that don't always come up in other contexts, as the city attorney was mentioning. So it can be very difficult. Business activities may be number 2 on that list of, the degree of protected speech. Your ability to sell a building, that's pretty high up the list of business activities.
Yep, I understand that. All right, secondly, flashing signs, namely the Hookah Cigar Shop on 18th Avenue, and I think Jesse's Mart might also have them, where the interior of the window frame are rather distracting, flashing, multicolored lights. Is that, I know that I brought that up with staff before, specifically the one on 18th Avenue, and was told that will be addressed in the sign ordinance update. Is that being addressed in this update?
So there is some regulation, like I mentioned, about electronic signage. There's also regulations about that window signage stuff where we reduce the amount of, well, let me back up 2 things. The current sign ordinance does not allow us to regulate signage on the interior of the window. It's a loophole, okay? The new one explicitly states that we will regulate signage on the exterior and the internal. So that's number 1.
Good.
Number 2, we reduce the amount of signage space allowable on a window pane, okay? So that will reduce the kind of obnoxiousness of some of those signs, which in some cases, I believe the business you mentioned on 18th, it's like the entire window pane is like lined in flashing lights. Now, there are instances where the lights on the interior of windows are not signage, so it's just lights.
Right.
in which case this ordinance, just by definition, will be unable to address that. That may be a safety concern that we need to talk about, but inside of some other regulation.
Okay. So once we adopt this, am I going to be able to call you and say, Miles, there's these flashing lights within the inside of the window frame
Right.
on 18th Avenue? I mean, is that?
If
that
they're
going to be
just lights,
there's some sort of like Lego, you clip them together and you'll put them on the inside of the window. I don't know if it's a sign or not, but I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Mr. Morrison?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on if it's a sign or not, but there might be other ways, as you mentioned, of nuisance. I know that at one time when Pond Central was down on the avenue over here where Gendler's used to be, we looked into how quickly the lights change color and how how many lumens and how quickly it changed. And so, I mean, there could be those issues as well, and then that was taken care of on a safety issue because it was so close to the street and distracting drivers. That might be another option.
And I can do that now before we update this ordinance, yeah?
Yeah, especially if it's not a sign, so.
I'm going to
Some-
be emailing you.
Some I've seen are just outline the window on the inside.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And if it just all it does is outline it, I don't know.
That's not really, that would not be a sign.
Correct.
For us,
Right.
so.
But
All right.
you still can have issues, safety issues, just because it's not a
Correct.
sign doesn't mean you can put a strobe light next to
Right,
you know.
18th Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send an email. Next, enforcement. So what Munices is the mechanism by which we enforce sign violations?
Ultimately, but as I was saying to Alderman Polos, I mean, like, we, to the greatest extent possible, attempt to just work with property owners to get to a resolution without having to take them to that process, right? It's expensive for everyone, it's time-consuming, there's a backlog of cases. So really what we try to do is we try to be a friend to everybody. We show up and try to find solutions, you know? So if someone has signage in violation, we kind of walk them through how they would get to compliance. And if there's a situation that's really difficult to resolve, you know, we will do our best to be a friendly neighbor and helper to them, with Munices being the final kind of recourse. I don't want to have, you know, myself or other staff persons show up at a business and say, you're in violation, period, and walk away.
Yeah,
That's not
no.
helpful. So we
I
try to
think-
be constructive.
I think that's a very appropriate way to go about things. I know that still it comes down to Munices sometimes. And so in my head, I'm thinking, is there a way that I can link together a business's right, or not right, but privilege to have a liquor license with complying with the sign ordinance? I mean, in our current liquor license, is there language that, you know, if they don't comply with the sign ordinance, would they be able to have their liquor license revoked or suspended for some period of time?
I believe so. I think I'm trying to remember that, but I think the liquor commissioner has the ability to do that.
That I don't know. I would think there probably is language. We can check and make sure and get you a note on it. But I would think that compliance in general with other ordinances would be a condition to be in good standing. But I'll double check and let you know what we find out.
Yeah, if there's not in the liquor ordinance, then I don't know if the sign ordinance would be the appropriate place
I
to
think
put that.
I think the appropriate place would be the liquor ordinance, since that's the thing that you're trying to take away.
Okay,
So,
well, then I guess, you know, heads up, team.
Yeah.
I would very much like to dangle some businesses' liquor licenses by complying with these rules, because I haven't had a lot of success with some of them.
I know in the gaming license, we're talking about doing the signage inside the gaming ordinance and not with the signage ordinance.
Okay. You brought up square footage. I know part of the issues that we've had is 100% of the face of the business is covered in signs. You said, yeah, that's an exaggeration, but so
maybe
you
like
said
75%.
Windows have to be 20% or something like
Yeah.
that. What about just like the face of the building?
So in the code as it exists now, we already have provisions that address, you know, your maximum sign frontage. If I remember correctly, for every foot of frontage, it's 1 square footage of sign that you get to have, or something like that. There are cases around town, if you look for them, where there are businesses that are in violation of those, again, existing rules. If there is a complaint received about them, we will address them. If there are specific cases you would like us to look at and actually do the number crunching, we would be happy to take a look at those. In most cases, it's probably already in violation if it looks like it.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, wait until we adopt this, and then we have our problem childs, and we can address the window signage, the square footage on the face of the building, the flashing lights, I mean.
That would
let's
be
wait.
our perspective as well.
I'm here for you. Last, final question, sorry. Feather signs are not temporary, they're portable, right?
So this
What's-
has
what's
been,
the- what's the
oh,
deets with the
feather
feather
signs.
signs?
So feather signs have been a continual issue. Currently, there's not in the code a definition for feather signs, in the code we have right now. So we have defined them as a freestanding banner, which is prohibited. You will notice, however, that there are still quite a lot of them. They're very popular. They're increasing in popularity. We felt that it was appropriate to first define them in the new code, so we have a definition for them in there, and also to allow them, but with restrictions. So one of the things that we require for temporary signage is that you're limited to 2 temporary signs per frontage. A lot of the time you'll see a business where they'll have their business frontage and they'll just have a whole line of feather signs, 6, a dozen, depending on how big it is. We would reduce that down to 2. We decided to do that instead of outright banning them, again, because it's a very popular signage type, and when appropriately used, really doesn't get in anyone's way or cause any specific issues. Obviously, not all feather signs are exactly the same, constructed the same way, affixed to a surface the same way. So there may be instances where a particular feather sign is inappropriate. We will have to address those on a case-by-case basis.
But it's considered a temporary,
It would be considered a temporary sign.
limited 30 days or whatever.
Correct, and that would be continuous. So let's say over the course of the summer, so multiple months, someone is putting a feather sign out and they're putting it when they open the business and then they're taking it back inside when they close at the end of the day. That would not be continuously out, okay? But then again, it's not out to cause a problem for a good deal of the time, so. We're trying to be reasonable with people. We don't want to discourage businesses from doing something which is very vital to them, advertising their business, putting their name out there. We try to accommodate them as best we can and really stick to addressing signs that are actual serious problems from a health, safety, welfare kind of standpoint.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm very cautious about allowing any at all, simply because,
Any signs at all, or any
Feather
temporary
signs.
signs? Oh, feather signs.
yeah, feather signs are the bane of my existence sometimes, but,
A lot of people were concerned about electronic signs too. As they have improved and they've become more commonplace, they seem a lot less obtrusive than they used to be. So
Right.
feather signs, we sort of saw the same way. I mean, there are a lot of them when in good condition and appropriately put out, really don't cause that much of a deal, big deal, so.
I agree. My
There might be
concern-
particular ones in
There are.
particular cases that are problems.
Well, and that's the problem, is there have been examples of, we are not allowed to regulate the content of what is being advertised. That's the freedom of speech freedom, right? But because we say that those are not allowed at all, then they're gone. And so I'm cautious. I'm nervous about losing my ability to ban signs that advertise liquor in a residential neighborhood, right? I mean, I've had many complaints from residents that live in the neighborhood that right across from their house is a giant waving flag that says liquor, cigarettes, beer, right? I mean, we can't regulate them to not advertise liquor, cigarettes, and beer, but we can bar that type of proliferating. I see it from the reverse. It's so popular that I would like to not allow it, because those who abuse it take it too far, right? So if we're going to wholesale allow each of these businesses 2 feather signs, then I'm gonna see 2 feather signs advertising liquor and beer all up and down 7th Avenue.
But
Which,
only temporary, so it's limited.
well, if they
not
go out
limited.
there and if they take it down every night and put it back up every morning, that's infinite then. It goes on as long as they're putting it away every night. And the residents of Greenbush sure aren't gonna be happy with those signs being back.
Sure, but there, and I want to make sure we have time to move on for things, so I
Yeah.
appreciate all the questions, but I do want to just say that those regulations would have to be applied equally over the entire town. And there may be a lot of other situations where feather signs really would be very appropriate for a business person to use.
I agree. We
So
regulate-
we have to try and balance these competing needs. I'm very sympathetic to the concerns you raise. But again, the fairness element, making sure we enforce everything uniformly in a defensible way is very important.
I agree, and we regulate plenty of things and bar a lot of things because a handful of people abuse them and the rest of us would be able to do it responsibly. And I think feather signs are a good example of, yeah, for most people it might be okay, but what is the vast majority of what you see advertised with feather signs? It's gambling, it's liquor. I'm starting to sound like a Puritan up here, but, I mean, it's a real issue in my ward. People hate these signs and they hate the visual appearance. And we may not be able to regulate that necessarily, but we can just get rid of the problem by saying, nope, not allowed. Sorry, all the businesses that were doing it right. These guys over here, or gals, or theys, ruined it for everyone, right? So that is my thought, unless we can think of some sort of, make it a special use permit or something like that, where we have a little bit more control over who gets to use that type of sign. That's my input.
Any other comments, council? We do need to move on, we got 2 other issues.
Yeah,
and-
thanks for my litany of questions. I've been waiting for this one for a while.
Thank you, Miles. All right, we have solar.
Yeah, I'm not done yet.
No.
So right now, hidden inside of the general provisions of the zoning ordinance are a few lines about solar panels. Those lines have been there for maybe about 15 years or so, and don't really reflect kind of what we see now. So the proposal is to pull those lines out of the zoning code and create a standalone solar energy ordinance so that it's easy to find, much better, easier to understand, and kind of is up to date with what we're seeing out in the real world. So solar panels are getting a lot more popular, and I should probably say solar energy, because some people are also using solar heating systems, which are very interesting. But all of these are getting more efficient, more affordable, and a lot less intrusive. So here's a house, it's from the Chicago area, but it's a really good example of solar panels really not being all that noticeable. If you were just walking down the street, you might know they're there, but they're really no more eye-catching than, putting in some flashy new windows or putting on a small front porch. They're pretty innocuous, and getting, smaller and more innocuous all the time. They're also increasingly popular with both commercial and residential properties. So we have a lot of commercial businesses, including industrial scale ones, putting solar panels into their facilities. They're rarely used to provide like 100% of the electricity for a building, and they're really just meant to try and bring your power bill down a little bit. It's supplemental energy. So a lot of people are not aiming to coat their entire property with solar panels. They're just looking to, shave a few dollars off of their bill. The existing solar ordinance, again, is kind of hard to find. You wouldn't immediately know where to go to find it. It doesn't really address the wide variety of different types of systems that are now on the market. It talks about them as if you're only going to have solar farms, which is really not what we most often are seeing. It also has certain requirements that don't particularly make sense, trying to address problems that seem not to really exist. So, for example, we right now have to fence in every ground-mounted system. Well, a lot of residential installations might be really small, would be in your backyard. Why do you need to fence them in? There's not really a safety issue at play. And in a lot of respects, the current code, in all of these different ways, doesn't encourage people to explore this as an option. In fact, it seems to discourage them from making this kind of investment in their property. So, what changes have we made? We've put in a clearer purpose statement, saying what the ordinance is for. And updated definitions so that they include all of the new types of systems. There's roof-mounted, there's ground-mounted, some are for heating water, some are for heating things beyond that, coolants and things. We also remove the unnecessary fencing requirements. We've said that a backyard ground-mounted system can't exceed 6 feet tall. If your neighbor really dislikes the small solar panel you've put in your backyard, they can put a fence up at 6 feet tall that'll block the side out, okay? It also allows all types of systems in all types of locations. So we get rid of any of the zoning requirements saying that it has to be in certain zones. Again, the regulations on the books now seem to only reflect like an industrial level solar field installation. It prohibits you from doing solar in a lot of other very reasonable areas. Got rid of that. Solar has its place in every zone depending on context. And then also for ground-mounted systems, it does not require, but it encourages that people don't put in gravel or concrete or anything like that, but instead put in permeable surfaces, preferably native plantings and the like. This was something that came to light when we were working with some of the sisters at the nunnery out in Southwest. They are installing a massive solar array, and that was a feature that they thought was very important for water infiltration and also just for appearances. A lot of people in conversations around this subject have the mistaken view that you need to put in gravel or something underneath the systems to protect them or something like that. Not true. So in summary, this kind of thing is just fine. It's really not a problem. In fact, if it helps some of our residents save a little bit of money in the long run, we should make it easy for them and embrace this kind of increasingly popular technology. Any questions about that?
Do we have any demobilization issues then for, like, say, I own a house, I put a nice solar array up there, and then Alderman Hurt wants to buy my house, do I, the demobilization of the system, is there any requirements in that regard?
That's not something that the ordinance would address, and it's not an issue that I have ever had brought up. I mean, it would be an improvement to the property that I think would go with the property from owner to owner. In the same way that you might, renovate any part of the house and you don't take those improvements with you when you sell it. It's not quite the same thing as like appliances or something that you might take. The systems usually being installed now have 30-year lifespans and maintain a relatively high level of efficiency for that whole time, so they're pretty much permanently in there, unless you're talking about a very small system.
Well, the reason I ask this is at the IML there were some comments made about the city's putting in solar panels and then having a demobilization plan due to the fact that there are a limited number of areas that will dispose of those. And I was wondering if that would apply to the homeowner or if that is just something that would be on a larger scale.
I would imagine that's something that more often comes up when we're talking about like a full solar field array installation. So it's something large, something commercial, and not so much for a smaller residential installation.
Thank you.
But does it come up as far as how to dispose? It's like a lead battery or paint. We kind of regulate that you can't put it in your regular garbage, or batteries got to be, taken to
Right.
a place. So would these fall under that type of a deal of how to dispense of them if you were going to?
I don't know that the ordinance necessarily should address that question the same way that we don't have ordinances that specifically describe how you get rid of like an old computer or something like that. The materials that these are made of are non-toxic. They're mostly, silicone and a few other things. So they're not, or silicon. So they're really not like a toxic material, but they would probably need to have special disposal. Again, though, the product's lifespan is quite extensive, so people wouldn't be throwing these out in large quantities very often at all.
Any other questions?
Are you familiar with SolSmart?
Yes. I'm on their mailing list.
Are we going to be gold certified or whatever after we do this now through SoulSmart?
We could explore that if you'd like.
If we're updating the ordinance, we may as well try to get some free press.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be clear, I mean, what we would be doing is we'd be creating a new solar ordinance.
Right.
Again, it's just a couple of paragraphs basically in
Yeah.
the zoning code now, so.
Right, I mean, so if I understand correctly, SoulSmart is just it's an organization that's going around trying to encourage municipalities to update their zoning codes to be more inclusive for solar energy, right? Which is exactly what we're doing here. If we can just get SoulSmart involved, I mean, they put out congratulations to the city of Rock Island for being the 300, they just sent me an email about having the 300th city certified as a SoulSmart community. I mean, it's free press, and if we're doing this anyway, may as well loop them in and see, and maybe they have some ideas that we haven't thought of while we're doing this, right?
Yeah, we can look into it.
All right,
I don't have any objection to that.
historic preservation.
Yes, there's a specific clause in there that says that if you want to install a solar energy system onto a locally landmarked property or a property that's inside of a locally designated historic district, it needs to receive a certificate of appropriateness from the Preservation Commission.
Is the Preservation Commission going to award a certificate of appropriateness for installing solar panels
It would depend where the proposed installation was taking place,
on the back of the house?
visible from the street or not. I mean, it would depend, again, on the context.
All right, sounds good. Fire protection, anything in there? Do we have to be?
Yep, there's a
awarded?
line in there that says that an installation of the systems has to comply with both the electrical code and the fire code, which is something that is not currently in our language.
All right, so both making sure that if there was anything, if the electrical array started on fire, it protected the house.
Yep, the
or-
fire code has provisions in it that specifically address setbacks from roof edge to allow emergency first responders access to the roof to address that kind of situation.
That's all I got.
There you go. I'm glad I addressed all that.
We need to move on to the next one. What's that? We have one more, I think.
Gaming
Yeah.
ordinance,
But
yeah.
Gaming, so, I'll let the mayor take the lead on this, I guess.
Oh, gee.
I don't know. So the mayor and I have been working on, there's no slides for this. We're working on an ordinance right now, but before we go any further, we just wanted to get some guidance from council. So what council limited, a couple of years ago, they limited the number of gaming establishments to 21. So it's 21 throughout the city. As you can imagine, in the intervening time, some new businesses have come in and some existing businesses have said, hey, we would like to have some gaming machines. What we were trying to eliminate were the slot machine type places, not to stop legitimate bars and restaurants from having them, and also trying to stop their proliferation into some of the residential neighborhoods. So I guess one of the things that we'd like to ask is, would you be open to some changes into the number of gaming licenses? So the thought we're working on now is the number of bars that could have gaming licenses would be limited to 20. 20 would account for the bars we have now and the ones in the pipeline, and then a restaurant license would be something different. And it would be essentially unlimited. If a business was a restaurant and they wanted to have some gaming machines in the back, that would be fine. It's obviously not their primary business. So how do you define a restaurant? Well, the liquor code identifies a restaurant, so they'd have to follow that criteria, because they do have to have a liquor license in order to have gaming. And then 75% of their business would have to be food. Additionally, every new business would have to be open for at least 6 months, a restaurant or bars or otherwise. So no one could open specifically just for gambling. They'd have to be in business at least 6 months before they could request to have gaming machines. So any thought on an expansion? So it'd be like if Harris hasn't asked us, but let's say they did. Would we want to allow Harris to have, or any other restaurant that's Mulkey's, wherever,
Well, my immediate response is more new revenue is good for the city. Are there any other types of businesses besides liquor establishments or restaurants that would be considered?
There are not right now. We'll get to that here in a second. Not for the video gaming machines.
Legally, the state regulates you have to have a liquor license to do that.
Yeah, we are talking about increasing the fees also. Right now, they're $250. Moline charges the business $50 per machine, and the person that owns the machine, the company-owned machine, $1,000.
Annually.
So we would like to bring that forward to you also, is to increase our revenue.
I personally think that increasing those fees is probably a good idea, because I think we lose a lot of money that we're not garnering from the casino boats. We're losing some money there. What is the current, what is currently in place as far as requiring serving food in these, is there a?
Yeah, 50%, so any new one, and we only have a few of these that are in right now, so when the ordinance was passed, everyone else was grandfathered in, which is why the laundromat behind us here is, or at least used to be the #1 place in the county. They don't really serve much food or beverage, obviously. Everyone else, so any bar, any restaurant now would have to be 50% food and beverage.
So, only because this was brought up to me a few days ago, that I had somebody else there was another person that wanted to do one of these. So let's just say the Suzie Slots.
Yep,
Now, are they covered grandfathered?
they are not grandfathered
By
in.
the company, or is it
By
all new in
individual
each?
site.
Okay.
Yeah, the location.
Each individual liquor license
Okay.
is what it's based on, and they have a separate liquor license on that one versus any others.
Well, I personally have no problem expanding this idea myself, so.
Then we'll bring it forward to you, and you'd be able to vote on it. This is just, we don't want to go to, we've been putting a lot of work into it, but we didn't want to go any further, and
And it would talk about signage also in that, we'd talk about signage, so it can't cover the windows or, that sort of thing. That, once again, Miles is helping review and make sure that it makes sense.
I mean, if I remember right, when we limited, it was to essentially protect Joomers, right? And so,
It does,
I
it does,
mean-
you gotta remember that Joomers is affected by what Moline does and Milan does, and even, and that sort of thing. And of course,
Correct.
the biggest effect was the Iowa land-based, when those came in.
Yes.
And interesting enough, Joomers got into the machine business. They own machines and rent them to these places now.
yeah, I'm sure they're
So-
diversifying their portfolio. It's just a matter of just working with a long-established, dedicated business in Rock Island, right? I mean, would we, if Modern Women had some sort of competitor that was able to suddenly spring up in every single little business, would we turn around, yeah, sure, no problem, whatever, Modern Women, don't, whatever. I mean, Joomers has invested a lot of capital in this city, and not only just the lost revenue that we get from the gaming money that we get from Joomers, but also just, I know that statewide, I mean, not only with the Iowa land-based casinos, but now statewide with the expansion of gaming in Illinois, more and more casinos are saying, hey, there's no money in this anymore. And so, not that 3 more bars in Rock Island with slots machines is gonna put Joomers out of business, but, I mean, that was the intent, is to some respect, say, thank you for, take Suzie Slots as an example and compare their capital investment in the city of Rock Island versus Joomers. And I'm gonna say, hey, we put a limit on here for a reason. I would like to keep it that way. Again, I don't know why I'm becoming such a Puritan, straight and narrow kind of guy up here, but,
Well, oddly enough, I agree with you on that one. My concern is what, the effect it would have on Joomers, and again, I don't think it's gonna be that bad, but it's the appearance that we need to be protecting.
thank you.
At this point, Milan doesn't have any restriction on it at all.
Oh, and you can
so-
tell.
Yeah, it's exactly. Moline has 35. They put a limit of 30, but they have 35 of them currently on the books. And so it's still more than what we have here. At this point, currently, it would be about 25, that we'd have 20 of the bar, restaurant, or bar deals, and then about 5 of the restaurants at this point, is what it would be. About 2, 3 more than what we've got now.
Why did we grandfather in
That was the
all
council
suds and,
for this.
Suds and gaming.
Everybody was grandfathered in, so all of the businesses except for the new ones in the past couple of years are grandfathered in.
Do we have to do that?
I'm assuming it was a legal opinion at the time. I don't know. We can go back and revisit it
I mean, we can
because,
change an ordinance and say, hey, you gotta, in order to have this license, now you have to have 50% food and beverage.
but we can go back and look at that. I'm not sure. That was before my time, and I'm not sure.
Do
that
you have
was-
any insight?
You certainly have the right to change things, and then the question would become, what argument might they bring up in litigation to say that I'm somehow protected, you're not, this is an equal protection argument. So you have to make sure that you have good reasons, much in the same way that when Miles was talking about the signage. So you'd want to make sure that your reasoning was tight, and that it was to protect the public interest in some way, I think would be the best way to do it.
Is our reasoning tight right now for our limitation to 20 licenses, or whatever it is now, 21? Are we, I mean, do we have good defense in arbitrarily saying, we only want 21 of these?
I do think that the courts have said that you don't want to have one necessarily on every corner or have them, and so they have allowed for, reasonable limitations, time, place, manner, and number as well, for the health of the community, the economic health of the community. So I think that that would be defensible. The question, I guess, would be if those who had been grandfathered in, they say, hey, somehow that's now discriminatory against me, and it's hard to say what argument another lawyer might come up with on that, but I think you do have the right to change those types of things.
Sure.
We can go back and look and see what go back and look at the minutes and find out what the arguments were at the time. I don't know that.
One other excuse me, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, and if at one point they were the #1 gaming area in Rock Island County, I'm guessing that they would hire someone to try to protect that. I would imagine that's a pretty significant number, which would be fine. I'm just saying that would be something you'd want to make sure it was, because if they're protecting that kind of cash, I'm guessing they would probably fight pretty hard.
He calls me once a quarter to verify all the ones that do need to live by the new one, to make sure that they are.
Jenny's got a question.
Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, in regards to Jumers, I think it's a different demographic that we would be capturing at the bars, and I think revenue-wise, it would probably benefit us more, because you're gonna have more people gambling in a restaurant or a bar than going out. Because I don't gamble, but I wouldn't necessarily go to Jumers.
Yeah.
But if I'm at Poor Boys, I may.
It generates about $160,000 to $180,000 a year, is what those slot machines are doing right now.
So are we
We
talking
get
about
about 5% of that revenue.
definitive number of additions, or this obviously is not going to be an unlimited?
The only thing that's limited on the new ordinance, the way it would be proposed, is the bars and anything like Susie's or Steve's or whatever. Those are regulated at 20, and that would be in there, whereas 21 now, but that would be 20. The restaurant ones, the proposal would be, is that's not limited at this point, but there's enough restrictions on it that it almost is. You got to be in business as a restaurant or whatever for at least 6 months. So that's not your main purpose of it.
But you're
And-
saying we're looking at unlimited amounts of these in the restaurants?
Well, you look at it, we're not sure there, how many restaurants we have that even have an interest in it. But yes, at this point, there'd be 5 that would currently, right now, fit into that category.
Well, I don't
that
want to be
have
in a
them.
situation where we're just throwing them out to
Yeah.
every single place that wants them. I mean, I think we still need to have some restrictions on those.
We could do some restrictions on just the restaurants themselves. The downside is that you put that restriction on, let's just say it's 5, and then all of a sudden you got a good restaurant in town. Randy used the example of Harris. It's been around forever, it's been committed to Rock Island. Are you gonna say no? That's the problem. It gets to be a sticky wicket of taking care of existing businesses and helping them grow. Yes.
Does your definition of restaurant include fast food restaurant?
It includes well, it would, certainly.
They gotta have liquor.
It has to have a liquor license, but it would
Does it include a
fast food.
C-store that sells,
It does not, so you
Fried
have to
chicken?
have
C-stores don't have
food
one.
prepared on site, you have to have designated servers. It has to be table service, it would be what you consider a restaurant when you go into a
Gotta
place
waiters
as
and
a
waitresses.
restaurant.
Tables, you gotta have table service. And
But you have to have a liquor license.
You have to have a liquor license, so if a fast food place had a liquor license, and you can go to Europe and go to McDonald's and get a beer, so.
One other new part to it that has not come up, and has not been addressed by the state yet, is a deal called sweepstakes. That is also in the new ordinance, and that is a lot like the gaming deals, except for you can win prizes instead of cash. You can also turn it in for cash. And the state does not regulate those at this time. And so we were proposing to regulate them and only have 2 sites and tax it like the state tax it. Actually, the state gets a 33% tax, and so we would get 33% tax on that because the state doesn't tax it.
It
So,
looks like a gaming machine, but it doesn't require a liquor license, so technically,
But a racket,
it's a loophole, and some cities have been overwhelmed with them. I suspect at some point the state will step
Right.
in, but we would like to
regulate
get a
that right
handle
off
on
the
that
bat.
right now before it happens.
yeah, I would be supportive of regulating that, but again, I'm not supportive of,
You know, I'll talk to
Expanding.
Joomers too and get their feeling on that. I mean, the real reason we did it was to stop the proliferation of a slot type place. Because initially it was not, you know, all of ours were in established bars and restaurants, and then we had some people approach us that wanted to do more of just a gaming parlor, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay,
Bring it
Okay.
on.
all right, there you go.
We'll bring some forward then, have you discuss it publicly and vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there is a reception for the Labor Day Parade out in the lobby, if you'd like to get a water or some
Got about
cookies, I
15
think.
minutes.